The forest kingdom breathes in silence. Chapter 8. The Kingdom That Did Not Fall. The moss light was fuller now than it had been when they entered the map room. Lira stood at the cliff face's edge and looked across the valley and understood for the first time what the valley looked like when it was not trying to be seen. The daylight version of Elarwyn, the isotropic pale illumination through layered canopy, was a place of surfaces, stone and water and the dense greens of plant life, all of it present and specific and legible. But the moss light version was something else. The surfaces were still there, but their relationships had changed. The wide, flat channel caught the pale luminescence from both cliff faces and held it just below the water's surface, doubling it so that the channel appeared to run through a gap in the light, rather than through a gap in the stone. The bridges reflected it from their undersides, throwing upward the same pale blue-white that the moss threw outward, so that the bridge arches glowed from within. The elder trees, which in daylight were primarily vertical, trunks and the implied column of their upward growth became in this light primarily horizontal, the lower branches and root systems the most luminous, the canopy above them dark. She thought, I have been reading this valley in the wrong light all day. Not wrong as in mistaken. Wrong as in the daylight version was the public version. The version the valley offered to newcomers, to those who had not yet stayed long enough to earn the other one. This was the private version, the one it kept for the hours when no one outside could see it. For 600 years, no one outside had seen it. She was seeing it now. Senna walked ahead of them along the cliff face path, unhurried, the moss light collecting in the grey-green of her garment in a way that made her look like a moving piece of the cliff face itself. She did not look back to check that they were following. She knew they were following. She had, Lira thought, always known exactly where they were, not through watching, but through the particular spatial awareness of someone who had lived in a place long enough that they registered changes in it the way you registered changes in your own body. Not sight. Something older than sight. From further along the valley west, where the structures continued beyond the section they had explored, came sounds. Not the water, not the stone-on-stone percussion from earlier. These were softer, the sound of movement, of bodies in a space, of the specific acoustic signature of a group of people engaged in quiet tasks in proximity to one another. No voices that Lira could distinguish, no separate sounds that might be laughter or conversation, just the collective ambient texture of people who had been in each other's company long enough that they no longer needed to fill the space between them with sound. She had heard this texture before, once, in an elderly settlement on the coast, a community of fisher folk who had lived together since childhood, who fished the same waters with the same boats, who repaired their nets in the same evening light with the ease of people who had run out of anything requiring discussion and had arrived on the other side of that, at something more than silence. They had been in each other's presence so completely and for so long that they had become a single organism with multiple bodies, each one knowing without looking what the others were doing. This sound was like that, the community texture of people who had been living the same life together for a very long time. Senna led them around a curve in the cliff face path, past a section where the elder trees grew so close to the stone that the path narrowed to single file, the bark of the trees and the surface of the cliff nearly touching overhead, and into a broader space that Lira had not seen from the valley floor. The cliff face here stepped back in a series of wide ledges, each ledge perhaps 3 feet deep and 6 or 8 feet wide, and on these ledges the quiet kin were gathered in the evening. Not many, 8, perhaps 10. She could not count precisely because they moved slowly, and the moss light did not resolve individual features at this distance. They were engaged in tasks that the evening apparently called for, some tending the small glowing vessels she had seen in the map room, refilling or adjusting them, some working with materials she could not identify, the movements of their hands suggesting weaving or binding, one, on the highest ledge, doing something to the cliff face itself with the familiar curved tool from the map room shelf, the notched implement whose purpose she had not determined, moving it along the stone in slow horizontal strokes and pausing to check the result. She watched. She was watching carefully with the attention she brought to maps, not looking for the dramatic or the significant, but cataloguing the small and the ordinary. Because the small and the ordinary was what she had come to understand in the course of this day was the point. The channels maintained, the tools returned to their positions, the maps copied and sent. Not the grand gesture of a civilization asserting its existence, but the accumulated weight of ordinary acts performed consistently across centuries until the consistency itself became the extraordinary thing. Cael had stopped beside her. He was looking at the highest ledge, at the figure with the curved tool. His hands were in his pockets, which meant he was observing without the need to interact with what he was observing, taking it in at the level of impression rather than analysis. "What is that tool doing to the stone?" she said quietly. He was quiet for a moment, watching. "Removing something," he said. "Very slowly, the way you remove lichen before it damages the stone underneath, or the way you keep a channel from silting." He paused. "Maintenance, that's all. Just maintenance." Just maintenance. The 2 words contained the entire 600 years of it, the entire logic of a civilization that had not expanded, not contracted, not transformed into something unrecognizable, but had simply continued, had maintained itself, had made maintenance into the only ambition it required. She thought of something she had read years ago, a theory of historical civilizations, the idea that the arc of a civilization necessarily bent toward either growth or collapse, that a civilization that did neither was an anomaly, a stasis, an impossible third thing. The theory assumed that all civilizations experienced their existence as a problem to be solved, an insufficiency to be remedied through expansion or power, or the accumulation of resources. The quiet kin had apparently not read that theory, or had read it 3 centuries ago, and found it unpersuasive. Senna had moved to the lowest ledge, where 2 of the quiet kin were working with the glowing vessels. She spoke to them. Lira heard the sound of it, the particular rhythm of a language that used breath and consonant differently from any language she knew. Its cadences unhurried and low, the kind of sound that moved through the air without disturbing it. The 2 figures on the ledge responded with gestures and short sounds, not looking up from their work. Senna listened, responded, moved on. An ordinary evening, management of small things, the administration of daily life in a place where daily life had been the entire project for 6 centuries. The figure on the highest ledge stopped the curved tool and looked down at Cael and Lira, looked at them with the same complete attention Senna had used at first meeting. The absence of alarm, the presence of a very thorough notice. An older man, she thought, though the moss light made ages difficult. He held the tool at his side and looked at them for a long moment, and then returned to his work, the slow horizontal stroke resuming its rhythm. Acknowledged, filed, continued. She found this more moving than she had expected. She had spent a professional life working with documents from civilizations that no longer existed, maps and surveys, and records that were the only surviving evidence of places and peoples that had vanished, been conquered, been assimilated, been erased by the indifference of time. She had spent years reconstructing from paper evidence what living presence had been like, inferring the human from the document, feeling sometimes the gap between the record and the reality as an almost physical thing, the map that told you a road had existed but could not tell you what it felt like to walk on that road in winter, what it smelled like in spring. Who had known its ruts and its gradients, the way they knew the lines of their own palms? Here the gap did not exist. Here the civilization had not left documents and departed. It had stayed. The documents and the people and the valley and the daily life were all still continuous, all still in the same place, uninterrupted. There was nothing to reconstruct because nothing had been lost. The map on the wall in the map room and the people on the ledges and the channels running their lateral course through the stone were all part of the same unbroken sentence, still being spoken, still making its unhurried way toward whatever its conclusion eventually was. She had never encountered this before. She was not entirely sure she had the vocabulary for what it felt like. Cael said, not loudly, "I thought it would feel like a discovery." She looked at him. He was still watching the ledges, the figures on them, the slow and competent movements of people tending the things they tended every evening. "It doesn't feel like a discovery," he said. "No," she agreed. "What does it feel like?" He took a while with it, which was how he treated questions that mattered. "Being introduced," he said, "to someone who already knew you were coming, who has been going about their life and made a place for you at the table without making a fuss of it." He turned to look at the valley below, the moss-lit channel, the reflected light. "We thought we'd find something fallen, something we'd have to piece together from what remained." She thought of every archive she had sat in, every catalogue entry, interior survey, provenance unknown. The assumption built into those words that what was provenance unknown was also presence absent, that the document had outlasted the thing it documented. "It didn't fall," she said. "No. It just..." She looked at the channels, the bridges, the cliff face with its 6 centuries of patient editing. It stopped being visible to anyone who wasn't looking from the right place. Cael nodded once. "There's a difference," he said, "between something being gone and something being quiet." She looked at him. He was looking at his own hands, the way he looked at them when he had been working with them and was checking that they had done what he asked. He turned them over slowly in the moss light, looking at his palms. "I've been in a lot of places," he said. I've read a lot of ground, and I always thought the places that were empty were the ones that had given up something, lost it. He closed his hands. But this place gave nothing up. It just changed the terms, decided what it wanted to be, and kept being it. He looked up at the ledges. That's not failure. That's not loss. That's... He stopped. A choice, she said. A very long one, he said. They stood with this for a while. The sounds from the ledges continued their ordinary texture, the soft industry of people for whom the evening's tasks were simply the evening's tasks, unremarkable, requiring no explanation. The moss light held the valley in its pale, steady illumination, and the water ran its 3 continuous notes, and the valley went about the business of being exactly what it had decided to be. Senna returned to them. She looked at them both with the thorough attention she always gave. And then she looked at the valley's western end, and then back at them. She moved her chin toward the valley floor, a slight downward indication. They followed her back down, off the ledge path, through the fern corridor, and across the near bridge, onto the broad floor of the valley, where the ground cover absorbed their steps. She led them to a point they had not been, northwest of the stone table, where the cliff face had a deep natural recess, protected by an overhang of stone large enough to shelter considerably more than 3 people. The recess was dry despite the ambient humidity. The floor of it was the worked smooth stone of everywhere else, and against the back wall were materials that had clearly been placed in anticipation. Folded pieces of woven fabric in dark tones, 2 more of the small glowing vessels on a stone ledge within the recess, and the low familiar shape of 2 wide flat stones set at a height that functioned as sleeping platforms, not improvised, not prepared hastily for unexpected guests. She looked at Senna. Senna returned the look with the equanimity she returned everything. The sleeping space had been prepared, which meant it had been known they were coming, or not known specifically, not their names or their faces, or the hour of their arrival, but known in the way the valley knew anything, with the patience of something that had been tending the channels and copying the maps for 6 centuries in the reasonable expectation that eventually the rain would come. Cael crouched at the entrance to the recess and pressed his palm to the floor. He held it there for the familiar moment of reading. Then he looked at Lira with the expression she had learned to translate as, "This is older than I expected, and I am adjusting my estimate." "How long has this been here?" she said. Not to Cael, but to Senna, knowing Senna would likely not answer in the way the question was technically asking for an answer. Senna looked at the recess. She looked at the sleeping platforms and the stored materials and the vessels on their ledge. She made a small sound, a different one, more directed inward than outward, the sound of someone running over a count or a calculation they knew well. Then she looked at Lira and extended her right hand, fingers spread wide, held it for a moment, then did it twice more. 15. Not 15 years. The recess itself was far older, but 15. 15 times the space had been readied, 15 times someone had come, or 15 periods during which someone was expected and the preparation was made. 14 before them. They were the 15th. She stood in the recess entrance and looked out at the valley. The moss light was at its fullest now, the cliff faces on both sides producing enough of it that the valley floor had a visible, even illumination. She could see the channel running below, the double reflection of the moss, and the water producing a brightness in the channel's center that made it look, from this angle, like a road made of pale light running through the floor of the valley. She could see the bridges and the elder trees, and in the distance the dark mass of the western cliff face where the valley bent away into the section they had not yet explored. 600 years of this light, 600 years of the moss returning what the canopy offered during the day, in the hours when the canopy's contribution was withdrawn. 600 years of the channels running their lateral course through stone that had been cut for them and maintained for them by hands that had passed the work between generations the way you passed a tool, with the assumption of continuance. A kingdom that had looked at what kingdoms did, the expansion, the conquest, the accumulation of territory and resource, the inevitable thinning of attention across too much space until the weight of the thing collapsed itself, and had decided with apparent serenity that none of that was interesting, had decided instead to do one thing, and do it for as long as the stone and the water and the living tissue of the place allowed, to be here, entirely, continuously, without reservation, to be nowhere else, and want nowhere else, and need nothing that was not already present. Not failure, not absence, not the end of something that had been greater, the beginning of something that had known from the start exactly how large it wanted to be. Cael sat down on one of the sleeping platforms inside the recess. He had his journal out, the one for pressing, and he was opening it slowly, carefully, to the back pages where the day's collection waited. She watched him lay each plant out with the attention he gave to things he intended to remember. The valley floor ground cover, the fern frond, still slightly damp. 2 small pieces of the dark green ledge plants she had not seen him collect, which meant he had found them during some moment of her inattention when his hands had been doing their quiet automatic work. He pressed the journal flat. He set it aside. He looked at the glowing vessel on the ledge, and then at the moss-lit valley beyond the recess entrance, comparing the 2 qualities of light, storing something. Senna stood at the entrance for a moment. She looked at them both, a brief confirming look, and then she looked at the valley with the expression of someone who had done what they needed to do and was now simply in the place they belonged. Then, with no more ceremony than she brought to anything, she left. Her footsteps were not audible on the ground cover. The valley simply had her, and then did not. Lira sat on the second platform. The woven fabric beside her was warmer than its weight suggested, the material something she could not identify in this light, dense and very soft. She drew it across her lap. The cold she had been carrying since the descent in her shoulders, in the base of her spine, began to release its hold, degree by degree. Outside, the valley held its moss light steady, and the water ran its 3 notes, and somewhere on the ledges, the figures of the quiet kin continued their evening, unremarkably, as they had continued every evening, in the specific warmth of people who had been in the same place long enough that the place had become an extension of them. Not a kingdom that had fallen, a kingdom that breathed.